Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. Like many minority communities, Muslims often feel frustrated by the way they're depicted in the media. But is the media really biased against Muslims? And what can Muslims do to represent themselves better in the media? To explore these issues, we are joined by Noor Javed, an award-winning reporter for the Toronto Star. Let's get her perspective as a young Muslim woman in the media. Welcome to the show, Noor.
Thanks for having me.
So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your personal story and how you got into journalism.
So currently I'm a reporter at the Toronto Star newspaper. It's Canada's largest newspaper, and I work on the city beat. So I cover, right now I'm covering mostly the 905, the York region in particular, but so it's kind of, you know, if you go beyond Toronto, that's the area that I cover. And I have been with the Star for almost, I'd say, almost 8 years.
Wow.
Inshallah, this year will be 8 years. I've been a journalist in the city of Toronto for almost a decade. It's you know, it wasn't the path that I thought, you know, I would take when I was in university. I had always, and my parents had always encouraged me to kind of take the traditional route, you know, become a doctor, do science, you know.
Makes them the most money.
Exactly, the thing that you always hear most parents say. So I kind of tried that. I went to University of Toronto, I did human bio, I tried everything that I could to really like what I was doing. And I soon realized that I didn't like it at all. I liked doing stuff outside the classroom. I never really liked what was happening in the classroom. And so I started writing for campus papers. There was a magazine at the time called The Muslim Voice, so I started writing and working for that. And eventually I realized that I really liked reporting. And I had always liked writing, but it's always, you know, you'll always hear people say, oh, it's a good hobby, but you never really think of it as a profession. And generally there are so few Muslims in our community who are in journalism that it just seemed like such a difficult thing to do. But you know, I kind of persisted and I continued writing, and eventually I applied to do my master's in journalism, and I got in, and since then I've been really lucky. I've been able to find great employers, and eventually got a job at the Star. So that's, in a nutshell, how I got to where I am.
That's awesome. So Noor, did you find any challenges once you started working, like being a young Muslim woman in media?
You know, the challenges kind of started within the Muslim community even before I became a journalist. When I decided to become a journalist and I would tell people, you know, I want to be a journalist, they'd say, oh, well, you know, you wear a headscarf, like you're having a really hard time finding a job. And I think that became like even more of a driving factor for me. Like I was like, I really am gonna get this job. On top of that, I wanted, a lot of it was, when I was in, I think, second year, it was 9/11. And looking at the media representation of Muslims was, I think, when I think about it now, I think that was a big driving factor for me. Like I was really upset at what was being shown on, you know, TV. I was really upset about what I was reading in the paper. And so I think, you know, those two things kind of combined to really, really motivate me. And then, like you know, to answer your question, I've been really lucky because I've always had this idea that I'm going to find a roadblock. But to be honest, in Toronto, in such a multicultural city, wearing a hijab and, you know, being a visible Muslim woman hasn't really been a challenge for me in terms of getting a job. You know, where I work now at the Toronto Star and where I've worked in the past, like people have never looked at me and said, okay, you know, we don't want to hire her because she wears a hijab. It's almost been the opposite. Like they're really happy to have me on the table. They're really happy to have me in the newsroom. And they're very explicit that they're really happy that they have someone.
What about when you're actually covering stories and doing work?
Yeah, you know, there are times where I even think, okay, you know, someone's gonna say something to me. Like one time when I was working for the Canadian Press, I had to go cover a repatriation, which means like a soldier had died and they were coming back, and I had to go to Trenton, and I was so worried. Like I was like, oh my God, they're gonna like be so angry at me. I don't know why. I was still like a new reporter, and I just was so worried that, you know, the Canadian soldiers would, you know, look at me a certain way. But it's so much of it is in our heads, you know. And you know, we're extremely lucky that we live in a very multicultural and, you know, diverse city like Toronto. I think we I take it for granted, and now I, like, if someone is even like a little bit rude to me, I'm like, well, what's their problem, right? It doesn't become my problem anymore, it's their problem. So I really haven't, honestly, I haven't had any challenges working as a reporter.
So it's interesting you say that, you know, sometimes, is it really in our head? Because a lot of the times we see in the media, you know, especially nowadays with you know, concepts like terrorism and radicalization, a lot of the time Muslims are being attacked in a way, and a lot of, you know, Muslims, when you read the media, that's always the narrative. So how do we counter that and sort of address that?
One of the questions I get all the time is, you know, why is the media so anti-Muslim, right? Like, that's the big question. Why does the media hate us? And it's like, I find that I am in a really difficult spot because, you know, as a Muslim, I can see that side. As a journalist, you know, I can see the other side. You know, the big question is, is media biased against Muslims? And it's not so clear cut, to be honest, right? Like, you have to look at so many factors. I mean, you have to look at, like, if I was to say the Toronto Star is a bias against Muslims, I would say no, like, for sure. You know, we, as a news agency, we tend to be more liberal. We go out of our way to, like, you know, write, you know, positive stories. We go out of our way to, like, get Muslims in the news, in our paper. But, you know, all across Canada, across the world, there are so many news agencies. They all have their own biases, they have their own leanings, and so I think that plays a big factor in how they represent Muslims. You know, number two, I think you have to remember that, like, the media, their job is to present news, but their job is also to make money, right? Like, they're not doing it for our interest. They're doing it because they're these massive organizations that need to make money, right? They need advertisers, they need subscriptions, and so all those things play a factor, right? They're not gonna write, like, you know, this nice Muslim person did this nice Muslim thing, right? Like, they also have to sell their news, right? So that, if you can just kind of connect the dots and see that they're not gonna just always have good things, right? Unfortunately, bad news sells, probably better than good news, I don't know, but I don't think anyone has done that study, but I think that plays a factor in it. And at the same time, like, the reality is these things are happening, right? A lot of really bad things are happening within the Muslim community, like, and they're happening back to back, right? These terrorist incidents, whether it's here, whether it's in Pakistan, whether it's in France, whether it's in Australia, there's been so much back to back to back, right? So, you know, people say to me, I'm like, well, people say to me, there's so much bias, but I'm like, you know, the reality is these things are happening. Like, we can't live, you know, in, you know, a cave or, like, you know, dig a hole in the wall. Like, the reality is the stuff happens, right? So, you know, the question is, how does a media organization, like, write or reflect about those things? And I think that's where we have to focus our attention, and not just on, like, why are they reporting this thing? Well, it's their job to report this thing. They're going to report it, right? We can't say don't report it. This is the news.
So on that note, then, do you think our Muslim media channels or media, you know, organizations, are they doing the right things, in your opinion, based on what you've seen, or are there areas of improvement?
So when you say Muslim media, I'm guessing you mean, like, blogs and
or like other, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that it's a really big job, right? What we need to do is, like, really present a counter narrative, right? We need to tell the mainstream constantly that we are not bad guys, we are not terrorists, we do not support terrorism, and I think that's where really the job of the Muslim media comes in. And I think, like, it's on the one hand, it's a really good thing because so in the past, it was, like, only these newspapers or, like, you know, television shows or whatever, like, those were kind of leading the discourse. But now there's so much social media, right? Like Twitter, Facebook, you know, there's so much out there that can present a counter narrative. Like, if you look at there's so many cases and incidents of, like, reporters saying something and then, like, Twitter going crazy and then the reporter will apologize, right? Like, that never happened before. So I think as a Muslim community, like, there are some people in the US and in Europe that have really kind of gone on to this thing. I think in Canada we're still realizing that the power of social media, and I think the Muslim community should probably use that more to leverage that.
Any words of advice for for aspiring journalists?
I think, you know, when people come to me and say, I want to go into journalism, I always tell them, like, please come into journalism. You know, I think that you have to realize that it's not there's going to be challenges, and probably more now than they were when I was getting into it. But the need is so immense for Muslim journalists. You know, in my newsroom, there have been a few Muslim female journalists since I've been there, but I think in most news agencies there still aren't as many as we'd like to see, especially now with our community growing and with these issues coming up. I think it's like really important. I think also people have to realize like what it entails. It's not just about like writing a column, sitting in your like home, you know, or you know, you don't get these cushy jobs like, you know, my colleague Harun Siddiqui, who's worked so hard, and you know, he can now write a column about whatever he likes. You know, it involves like going out there, like doing real reporting, you know, putting your face out there, and kind of hiding in a way your own opinions on issues. Like there's so many times where I want to just go on a rant about something, and I can't, right? Because I'm an employee of the Toronto Star. You know, I represent like my paper, and you know, so you have to realize like what is actually what reporting or what being a journalist actually means, right? It's not just as maybe simple as you might think.
This was a really interesting conversation. Thank you very much, Noor.
Thank you.